What is up? What is up, everyone? Welcome to this month's top baits of the month of June, that is. And June is summertime. That is the official kickoff of summertime. May is that transition month. June, summertime is here for most of us. I am going to speak to all anglers. So I'm going to speak from the pond hoppers to the bank fishermen to the guys who are out here going to be competing on tournaments, and the guys that are weekend anglers just trying to get a bite. We wanted to sort of cover all of that spectrum, and even I'm going to do this as well. I'm going to talk a little bit about the north as well, some of the areas from Minnesota, New York, a little bit of that as well, to give you guys a little context of when I'm going to use some of the same stuff. Because typically, being in the south, I typically tend to make my top baits of the month for that given month here in the south, and you guys are typically a month behind, or maybe two at times. So we are going to dive into a little bit of it all. So let's kick this thing off with the first bait of this month, and that is going to be a frog. Because who does not like frog fishing? Okay, not more specifically, I'm going to stick to more of a popping style frog. Popping style frog because it's okay. This month is like the month of the mayflies. Okay, now the mayflies have not happened here. I know I'm hearing there's a mayfly hatch down south in Georgia. It tends to work its way up. For at least a lot of the south and the southeast, mayflies typically mean a couple different things. One, bluegill spawn is happening also in the months of May and June, and in addition to that, those, if they're not spawning, the bluegills are going to be up shallow, really feeding on those mayflies. And a popping style frog really imitates a bluegill so well. Looks like a little bluegill up there is eating those little mayflies with their... Who's calling me now? I got to call Lurch back. Lurch, I'm going to hit you back, man. Steven Scott, I'm going to call you back. Okay, so that being said, a popping style frog is one of the best because it is. Now, when I am working this bait, I will tell you guys this. I'm typically walking it. I'm going to throw it out there. Pop. I'm walking it, and like the more you like actually throw slack back at it, the more it's going to walk. Okay, also, other thing that I will say, I'm not typically, there's some people that really like to throw a popping style frog and chug it. I'm not really that big on that, but again, I like the little subtle, even if I'm not walking the frog, I'm going to sort of subtly, and the other thing is like you can throw like a popping style, like a popper as well, like a skitter pop or like a cover pop. Those are great baits to throw if you're fishing lakes that have a lot of like minimal cover. Okay, so what I mean by this, a lot of people think that you're throwing a frog to imitate a frog. That's not my goal in this. My goal is to imitate a bluegill, and I'm not always throwing it around grass. So if your lake doesn't have a lot of grass, that's okay. It's not like you have to throw a frog around just grass. A lot of times I throw it on shady banks, like I have right behind me, some undercut banks or shade. And the other thing, when I'm looking for fish actually with a frog, a lot of times I'll throw that bait up there, hit the dang bank, and I'll pop, a lot of quick jerks. So it's not making a big bloop, 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 bloop. I'm popping it really fast, and the bait's going, I'll show you exactly what it's doing, because you can't really see it right out there. But I'm working it pretty fast, and the bait's going bobbing like this. So it's like running away. So it could be a frog, could be a bluegill, but that's where it is. Now, as far as rod reel line, I am big on a 7-2 medium heavy for this technique because I'm not fishing super heavy cover. I am not really, I want to make sure I have something that has a fast tip, okay? Because what that's going to allow you to do, more than anything, see this has a fast tip here, which is like a little bit more to him, a little limber. And then you go back to backbone back in here where you can pull those fish around those places. So that is personally my first setup. As far as line goes, 50-pound Suffolk Advanced or Suffolk 832 braid is my preference. Because I think a lot of times when you go up in like size of line, you typically you lose your casting ability. So I feel like 50 is the perfect in between on like casting ability and strength. That's my preference. A lot of anglers like 65. I know my buddy Kyle Welcher, he runs 65. I think even like, I know some anglers that run 80. It's all dependent on your own preference, but 50 to me, I can make those long casts. I can skip around those docks, skip around underneath those underhangs. And then I just feel like I just have the best of both worlds. Now there is one trick you can do to some frogs, is just making sure, the one thing I will say, just in general, you can cut your legs a little bit. I do go a little bit shorter because it helps you walk a little bit better. And I don't like a big long legged frog because I feel like the fish have a tendency to grab the back of the legs a little bit more. So preference, just grab you a pair of some scissors, cut it. It doesn't have to be perfect, just cut them a little shorter than they come out of the package. A lot of frogs have a little bit longer legs. I like to cut them up a little bit because, of course, where your hooks, they're in the front of that frog, or towards the body of the frog, and I don't want those fish to come up there and nip the legs. So then we got that figured out. In addition, the last thing I will say is I do like a higher gear ratio reel. I throw that 8:3 to 1 gear ratio reel. This is the old school Ducket, but there's also some Shimano's in here that I use as well. I'm sort of going back in between. You guys let me know what your favorite reel is, because I'm sort of in between on stuff. I don't know exactly what I'm going to throw, but I've been using the Shimano's. I have some Shimano's. I really like the Corrado. That 150 size is really nice, the high speed, but I don't have a ton of them. So you guys have probably seen this by now. I have a handful of old discontinued Ducket reels, and I have some Shimano's in my lineup. It just really depends on, you know, out of all the rods, I don't have all of them enough to replace them. So I'm sort of bebopping around between the two. So that's it for the frog. That is what I would be throwing right there. I'm going to dive into where I'm going to be fishing this frog. And typically, this lake this week is going to be Table Rock. Table Rock Lake in Missouri, in Arkansas. I'm going to show you guys this big sucker right here. I try to go to a different lake every time. I think last couple times I've been to Watts Bar, I've been to Lanier. So this is Table Rock. You got Branson right there. Let's just go up into the James a little bit where it's a little flatter. So a lot of times there's two things that I'm going to be looking for these fish on the frog. Now this is a highland reservoir, so those of you who are fishing highland reservoir lakes, this is going to be a pretty good in-depth deal right here. I'm going to look for, now Table Rock is unique because there's going to be bushes. So the flatter point, or the flatter points and stuff like that, are going to have bushes on them, and the flatter banks are going to have bushes on them. So I'm definitely going to be checking those. But then also, in addition to that, I'm going to look for those steeper banks and anywhere there's shade pockets. The bushes are going to be my main thing on this highland reservoir lake. We've had a lot of rain all over the country. Whether Cherokee and Douglas, a lot of those lakes are up. Same thing. You throw a top and pop and frog. Around those same thing, bushes are a great place to look. There's fry garters, there's bluegill spawn. Last bit of fry garters, really last bit. But most of those fish are up there, and they start to wolf pack the best in June. So those small, shallow pockets are definitely somewhere I'm going to be looking at for sure. Okay, so back to the video I had a buddy of mine. Man, people were just, all of a sudden you try to shoot a video and you hadn't had a call all day, and brrr, brrr, brrr. Anyway, so you guys know how it is. So that definitely, pockets are a great place to look at. These places on like Table Rock and Highland Reservoir, it's going to have a lot of outside bends. You could even look at potentially looking at some of these places like outside bends, but these are typically bluff banks. I'm going to look for more of like the mud and the pea gravel banks, because that's where the majority of those largemouth are actually going to sit in these places. But, so definitely look inside of a creek. The other place I'm going to look as well is the way back. If you look back in here in this creek, it's the main creek, the very back ends of these creeks, because a lot of the bass on the main will tend to either go deep, or there'll be a few of them shallow on a bluegill spawn, or up there shallow just roaming around. But the very backs of the creeks, there's bass that are actually going to be shallow all year long, not spawning all year long. They're going to be focusing on shallow water cover, whether that's wood, whether that's all really starts to focus on some of those guys in the backs of these creeks. So these areas like right here would be a great place to throw a topwater, a buzzbait, and that frog, as well as undercut banks. They're not as bluffy. I mean, there's some bluff banks in the backs of those, but there's some bass, so we stay back there all year long. So that is it for the frog. Next up is going to be, okay, I'm just gonna pick this up because the frog is like good for like all the time, like no matter where you go, but this is one of my favorite things. If I had like, this is the month, if you do not know how to deep dive or cranking deep water, and deep is relative, this is the month for you, like right now. Like, this is the month to go out offshore and learn how to use a deep diving crankbait. And so for that reason, I am picking up the DT lineup of crankbaits. DT16, DT20, DT14. I got them all tied on. As far as color goes, you can't go wrong with like a citrus color like this in the DT20, or shad pattern. Big shad's a great one. Those are all great color crankbaits to be throwing. Now, as far as like where I'm targeting these fish, a lot of this is point related. They're big points, bars, places these fish are schooling up at. I'm not utilizing this technique by cranking down a lot of these places and fishing like a single fish. Like a crankbait to me in down south is fishing for groups of fish. So I'm really utilizing my Lowrance electronics, looking and trying to find these main points, because the main points, and most of them are fairly obvious, where the biggest groups of fish are going to be. They're main points, they're big giant like pushes out there into the lake. They get the most current, which therefore gives the bass, the reason why bass go on these points is because it gives the bass the most opportunity to sit on the bottom and really ambush bait. It's all about feeding right now. They're trying to either feed shallow or they're trying to feed deep. So points and humps and places that give them the furthest extension out into some deeper water. Deep water is the home of the fish. You hear that from Buck Perry. For any of those who know it, let me know. Let me know if you know what Buck Perry is, who Buck Perry was, spoon plugging. I want to know if anybody knows, because this one's actually, if you don't know, it's okay. But I was taught by an old gentleman a long time ago about deep water is the home of the fish. Now, of course, things have changed in bass fishing a little bit, and we know that to be a factual. So the bass want to have a connection to deep water. Deep water is relative, again, because it could be deep. 12 feet of water can be deep in a certain area in the back of a creek. So you got to sort of figure that out. Of course, this time of year, I'm going to have a DT10, a DT16, DT14, DT20. If I'm going out there to learn how to deep crank, that's what I'm going to do. You can deep crank stump rows. You could definitely, but for me, my favorite thing is definitely deep cranking on those fish that are super deep or down there deep, schooled up. Now, as far as how do I deep crank, I will say this. People don't understand, like when I'm talking about this is my 7.6 medium heavy cranking rod, 12-pound Subex Advanced fluorocarbon. This is 6:2:1. I'm more on that lower gear, 6:2:1 gear ratio. I know some anglers will go to 5:1, but this is the deal. Okay, this is the retrieve right here. First off, you let that rod load up, and you see how it's like a round the world cast like that. That's really my big thing with a crankbait, because you want to get distance, because the further you get out there, the more you're going to be hitting the bottom. You need to be hitting the bottom. Okay, let's hit. A lot of times, if you just go like a real quick little cast, you're not going to get as much distance if you just load the whole rod up, turn around, and launch a sucker out there. You're going to get a lot more distance that way. Okay, so now I got that crankbait out there. This is the retrieve. You want to be, I mean, when I'm talking about cranking him, is this 6.2? Ain't no way. Hit that bottom, boy. Hit that bottom. Hit that. Ain't no freaking way. That right there is literally the cadence. You guys, this is the first for everything. Caught him live right here. What the heck? Look at that. That bass could not resist. Okay, calm down. That bass could not resist. Now he's probably about 8 inches at his best, but we're gonna make him look like a legitimate 10. There you go, right there. That's crazy. Okay, so you guys gotta see it. He sort of messed me up a little bit, but that's what you want to see. So you can crank, like this is just like a shallow little point I pull up on here. I'm not gonna cast out the ground. But again, cranking it faster, and then once you hit that bottom, hitting the bottom and deflecting off of that stuff is really important to getting those fish to react and getting the bite. So that's a cool deal right there. And there's always something you can learn. I would have been like the first for everything. So now, as far as where we're going to be looking for these offshore fish, I'm going to show you guys exactly what I'm looking for right now. Let's jump to the sea maps. Lowrance has this map already preloaded in on these graphs, so that is something that's cool. Okay, so here's a great example. A hump right here. Okay, you got 26 foot of water around it. This is probably like 15 up on top. That's a great example where I'm going to start to look. Hump is great because, again, it's deep water access right there. Okay, what's the most obvious place? Okay, the most obvious place would be this hump right here. Now that's 36, but you can see this point comes out there. That point is going to be the most obvious. Big pieces of structure that come out into the lake. Those main points are going to be your most obvious places, but are also going to have the largest groups of fish. It doesn't matter if you're on the Tennessee River, it doesn't matter if you're on a highland reservoir. Those major points and big humps tend to draw the most fish. Now I'm going to be start to look at in the mouths of these creeks. So the mouths of these creeks, the mouths of these spawning areas, even this place right here, there's a lot of stuff right there. Ooh, like right here, okay, this is a great example. Flat, 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 and guess what? It's a little bluff in right there. Perfect little corner right there, okay? Perfect little corner where I would be focusing my time and energy looking at that little corner right there. There's probably going to be a group of some sort of bass there, spotted bass, largemouth, something. So that is something that I'm going to look for, whether you're throwing a football jig, throwing anything else, a drop shot, a crankbait. These are where I'm going to start to look for groups of fish. The other thing that you're really going to want to keep, I'm going to give you a little tip here. The current is flowing from north, which is up, to south. So anywhere there's going to catch current, think about it, okay? Right here is going to catch a little current because there's water's coming down the system. It's going to catch it right there. It's going to catch it right there. Anywhere it's catching current, that's where a lot of times the fish will set up to feed. That's something, no matter where you're at in the country, it seems to work, whether you're in 2 foot of water or 25 feet of water and your fish grouped up. So that is where I'm going to be looking for offshore groups of bass, and that's what I'm going to look for first. So hopefully that helps you out in finding those fish. So we got our deep down crankbaits, got that, that's good. Okay, back to my shallow water fishermen, okay? You guys gotta sort of go back and forth. I'm not gonna make it all, even though I love fishing out and deep, I grind my teeth fishing shallow. I learned how to fish shallow, fishing on the White River in Indiana, fishing on Geist Reservoir, and so the majority of my early years were all about fishing shallow water and being able to do it more efficiently. The thing about fishing shallow, sort of talking, and this one we're gonna talk a little bit about a swim jig. A swim jig is an underrated summertime bait. A lot of times the water gets pretty clean in the summertime. The water gets a little bit cleaner. And so typically what happens around this time of year, I get off of like that vibrating jig bite as much in a lot of these lakes, and I get more on that swim jig, more natural presentation, a little bit more subtle. That's what I'm looking for. And this swim jig right here is just a 1/4 ounce swim jig with a cleanup crawl. And I just, again, bluegill imitator is what I'm going to most likely look for. I got some orange in there. Even got a little chartreuse for MDJ on the tips, No, I mean, listen, okay. If you guys have watched that video with MDJ and I talking about blue, I will admit, when you look at the bluegill, they do have chartreuse tips in the water. Now, you pull them out of the water, they look like, they're not chartreuse, they're like yellowish. They're like yellowish, pearlish, I don't know. When you pull them out, they're not chartreuse. But they do look chartreuse-ish in the water. So I'm going to give them a little bit of that. I was looking at a lot of bluegill the last 3 weeks. Ever since I've said that, people have lighting me up ever since. So I made a comment that they don't have chartreuse tails. I don't feel like they do. Now a green sunfish is different than a bluegill. Anyway, that being said, back on the swim jig. I'm sorry, guys. This one right here is one I've used a lot of times. It's like, I think it's like a Davis swim jig. It's a pretty good swim jig. It's got a big hook in it. Yeah, I mean, bluegill, you can go with green pumpkin, black blue. It's all relative to the water clarity that you're fishing. One thing that I'm going to talk about a swim jig and why it's really good as well. Shallow water cover, great. But also what it's really good for is fishing out there in grass. So you're out there in a 4 or 5 foot grass. Like, so say you're on Gunner's Hole. This is a great place to be able to throw that swim jig as well. Let it hit the bottom, boom, and I'll start shaking it a little bit, reel it a little bit. I might put a swim bait on the boot tail swim bait on the back of it and just wind it. It's a great alternative to throwing a chatterbait. And that's what I'm sort of like, I'm big on that. Either I'm shaking it or I'm actually just reeling it like this with a boot tail, like back there with a Largo shad or a mare. Like, those are two great ways to catch fish. As far as if I'm fishing shallow and shallow water cover, I'm going to go with braided line. A 40-pound Suffix 832 braid is my preference. The 7.2 medium heavy is my preference as far as rod. Fast tip. Similar to that frog, I want a fast tip because I can impart action shallow, but I also want more backbone. So that's really important there. gear ratio, 7 to 8 to 1 gear ratio, somewhere up in there is what I would recommend. I want that if that fish bites it, especially if I'm fishing it shallower, then I want to be able to catch up to that fish and set the hook. A lot of times the shallow water vegetation, like water willows, this time of year is a great way to throw a swim jig. Also, like pondweed is a really good bait or a good technique to fish that swim jig around that pondweed or any shallow water vegetation. Is really, really good. Lily pads, you guys get it. And so I wanted to sort of go into that. And it's a great pond bait too. If you have a pond that's pressured and those fish feel like they're just, you know, seeing a lot of vibrating jigs and stuff like that, a swim jig can be really a great bait to generate some bites on. Okay, so that's good for there. Let's just talk about it real quick here. Just because Table Rock does not have a lot of grass in it, I'm gonna sort of explain to you sort of like what I might be looking for. Typically, a lot of the grass in the highland reservoirs are gonna be on the points, and this one's a little tough here. Let's slide down here. I'm gonna say, okay. So they're gonna be on like a lot of the highland reservoirs are gonna have grass on the points and those bars as well up there shallower. So where I would say the fish are gonna group up in, and then also the backs of the flatter pockets. So backs in these flatter pockets like that, that's a flatter pocket. Anywhere the pockets like broader, let me see, there's a little steeper area, like a flatter pocket would be like, I mean, that's a little flatter. It's not super flat. We're down here towards the dam. So you guys get to just, like, anywhere those broader pockets in those highland reservoirs are going to have a little bit more, like, gradual slope to them. And it's going to be something that I'm going to be looking for the grass. As far as a swim jig goes, same thing around the bushes for these fish that are on Table Rock. I'm going to be swimming that jig around those bushes because I feel like that's a great way to generate a couple bites. If they're not biting the topwater, not biting the frog, I can switch that swim jig. It's subtle. It could be in super clear water. I can generate just as many bites doing that. And I would recommend the braided line for that as well. So that's my recommendation on pick number 3. Let's go ahead and move on. All right, I'm going to pick it up. Sorry, guys. I have to add this one in there. I'm going to give you one guess. One guess. Who can tell me what it is? What is it? It's you guys already know, the Crescity freeloader. I've had this in there, and it's like I'm almost gonna have to add a 6th pick because I feel like this is one that you have to have in your arsenal. Period. Actually, I did have 6 picks. Actually, because I did bring up 6 this week because I felt like that was something that you need to have. Until they stop biting you, one bait that I will have tied on all year long is this bait right here. Okay, and that's that freeloader 4 1/4. This is gizzard shad. They're just showing up. They're actually coming back in stock in a lot of places, gizzard shad. So this is the time to sort of stock back up before the craze hits again. There's been actually a big Toyota Series tournament won here on this lake on the freeloader. I talked about that. And in addition to that, I believe a MLF invitational tournament down on Lake Eufaula on a freeloader as well that played a big role. This is what it's all about. You gotta, I'm just telling y'all, this is like the new swim bait. And I was taking Nick out there the other day, we were fishing, and you do not have to see you do not have to have live scope, you don't have to have active target to fish this technique. Even guys in shallower creeks, throwing lighter heads, this is gonna be a technique that's gonna work for you and generate bites, especially when you find a spot and you wanna show them something different. This is gonna be it. I'm gonna show you guys reel at the cast out now. They might bite this sucker. As you already know, there's one there. So I'm casting them out there and let it hit the bottom. Okay, for all my friends out there that are not, have no active target, don't know what's going on, let it hit the bottom. I'm gonna be imparting that action right there. I'm just shaking him, shaking him, shaking him. Now, if I'm fishing where I feel like a lot of times what'll happen is I keep on reeling my rod. I'm reeling the line like right here, like I'm continuing the rotation of my reel. Pop, 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 pop. Stop. Let it go back to the bottom because a lot of times I don't know where it is in the water column. So say if I'm fishing 25 feet deep, I don't know where it is in the water column, then I pop again. A lot of times I might be a little bit too fast with it. So that's when I'll sort of go back to shaking it again. That's all you gotta do. And then I took a leash out last night and she caught her first one on shaking a minnow. So one thing I will add to this is if you want a little bit more action, a loop knot is definitely an option. I don't love a loop knot all the time because I feel like if you're one like me that doesn't like to retie nonstop, I feel like you have to be a little bit more on top of the loop knot than a Polymer knot, where you don't have to like, I feel like all I have to worry about with a Polymer knot, my knot's gonna hold strong, but I have to make sure there's no frays up the line. Where with a loop knot, I just don't trust it as much as I do that Polymer. So you're gonna have to be a little bit more diligent and really look and inspect your knot, making sure that it's tight. I've caught a few big fish on it this year, but I'm still a little bit apprehensive on it. I'm not sure. I will check back with you guys on that. And then as far as the jig head goes, my recommendation is 1/8 ounce all the way up to like probably a 3/8. My favorite 3/16 and a quarter is this hybrid swim bait jig. This is the VMC one, and the reason why I like him is that being able to rotate that freeloader around it. Like that spring lock right there, I can catch 10 bass on one freeloader. If I just put a regular jig head on, I might catch 3 or 4, maybe half as many. With that spring locking it in there, it sort of gives me, just gives me more bang for my buck. And now I don't know how accessible these are right now, but I'll check an Academy and see if I can drop a link in the description below for you guys on that. As far as line goes, 8-pound nano braid. You guys know I love that line so much. 10-pound sub-advanced fluorocarbon leader. 7.0 medium action rod, fast tip. I'm more on that a little more action to my bounce. You want to have a little bit more bounce and be able to allow that rod to load up and throw slack back at that bait. So that is my recommendation. You got to have him. And I'm not going to dive into necessarily where you're going to have to throw this. It's a lot of the same places that I'm going to recommend to throw it is the places that I was throwing the crankbait. So if you sort of skip through that, go back and watch where I was sort of like some of the places where I thought the schools and groups of fish were going to be. Shallower points is going to work well on shallower points as well. Just points in general. This is a technique that will work in shallow water as well. Cast it out there, shake it, and you let me know if you've caught your first freeloader bass this year, because this is something that like I think a lot of people, I've had a lot of people come up to me like, dude, I tried that in a kayak and I crushed them that one night. And it's cool to hear some of the success stories that are happening all over the country with this technique. Next up on the rotation, I'm gonna have to pick up something to flip with, because shallow water cover, this time of year is like, it's not like the #1 time of year to go like fish and flip shallow, but when I do this, it's more up the rivers, okay? So what I mean by that is I'm gonna go way in the backs of the creeks, way up the rivers. It's gonna get hot. Definitely towards the end of this month, the fish will start to break up, and the offshore bite won't be as hot, and the shallow water bite is the opportunity to really go up there and pitch around, whether it's lay downs, back to sort of just old school flipping and pitching. This is gonna be your opportunity towards the end of the month where I'm gonna have a flipping stick ready to roll. And for my shallow water anglers, there's still a lot of really big fish around shallow boat docks this time of year. So that's where I'm gonna pick up the Bronco Buck. Even though he's really good crawl action, he has a really good bluegill body as well, and a good bluegill undulating action. It sort of looks like a bluegill pitching around some of those boat docks. Caught a lot of big fish in the months of June that the fish are really focusing in on the boat dock pattern. That's something that I haven't talked about a lot. It's something that I feel like if you're not a deep water fisherman, you can catch some really big fish around these boat docks and generate some big bites. But I typically do fish the shallower ones on the main lake. If I'm looking for stuff, I'm more main lake, more flatter areas on the main lake, because I feel like, again, that is where a lot of the bluegill, the last bluegill spawn will happen in those flatter areas. So that's why I'm recommending to sort of look in some of those areas. Pitch around the backside, pitch the floats, pitch if you have pole locks, pitch underneath those shady pockets, and that's really important. As far as hook, line, all that stuff, 17-pound Subix Advanced Fluorocarbon, I like that sort of in between. I can still cast this bait out there working on points, but I also can pitch it around, so having a 7.3 heavy is not like a flipping rod necessarily, but in addition to that, it's just sort of an all-around. I can cast it offshore, I can pick it up, pitch it around. It's sort of an all-around Texas rig rod that I can generate bites. And I don't mind throwing this bait on like a swing head, but I actually like it better on a Texas rig. Working with it in the pool, it actually does a little bit better job of like that action if you reel it with a Texas rig than it will with a swing head. It works well with a swing head, but it works even better with a Texas rig. So don't sleep on that as well. And then that, as far as colors go, and actual the colors I'm going to typically just match it with the color of the water, or match it with the color of like the forage that I'm really like trying to imitate. So crawfish, of course your green pumpkins, of course your green pumpkin magics. This one's like more of you know, like a watermelon red. If you have, you know, some water where it's really dirty, your black and blue, stuff like that as well. But typically I don't really get too caught up with color. I just sort of match it to what, like how dirty the water is, and that's sort of a big deal for me. As far as flipping weight goes, 3/8 ounce is my preference for all around. 5/16 if you want to go lighter, half if you're trying to find them, and go out there and have some fun. But can't go wrong with a flipping bait, and you have to have one on the deck just because you never know when you come up to that tree, that perfect tree, and doop, got it. So that's where it is up there. I'll show you guys real quick here on the map where I'm going to focus my flipping attention, and it's really going to be towards the backs of these creeks. If I want to focus my energy anywhere, I'm going to go back where the water's the dirtiest, the water's a little bit, there's not as much opportunity for this fish to get really out there offshore. So the backs of the creeks, these outside bends, the inside bends, any new trees that have fallen in, green trees are always great to look for, because those ones are definitely one that if I see a green tree that's fallen in the water, I'm definitely going to flip them with a Bronco bug. That's for sure. So that's my recommendation. Go far back in those places, and you're going to generate some bites, flipping and pitching and throwing that frog as well. And then it's just a fun way to catch them for sure. Okay, so last but not least, I got another spinner rod, and this is for no matter where you're at in the country. This is just a bait, and just a technique that catches a lot of fish. It's a drop shot. Okay, you can't go wrong with a drop shot this time of year. A pink worm works all over the place. It's a ghost morning dawn worm, and then I'm throwing like the 1/4 ounce is my preference. A new VMC weight right there. It's going to be out of ICAST. And so to me, I think that a lot of times a drop shot gets a bad rap, and what I mean by that is I think, you know, a lot of anglers think that fishing a drop shot is just for fishing offshore schools of bass down south, or just fishing for smallmouth up north. It's just a great way to generate bites. And I think the biggest thing that I look at when I'm throwing a drop shot in general is like, this bait is just going everywhere. Like when it hits the bottom, it has this unique gliding action. It's just a completely different presentation than a Texas rig, where that bait's on the bottom. It has more gliding, bait's up off the bottom more. You don't have a weight in front of it. And I think a lot of times the biggest thing that I personally have seen with a worm specifically is throwing out there and actually snapping it. And I'm not saying snapping it, but like, I'll show you just in general. I throw it out there, right? Like that. Hits the bottom, I'm just sort of like pop up, let it hit the bottom. Pop up, I'm lifting it up, let it hit the bottom. And I go back to slack, and what I mean by that, what that does is your weight is hitting the bottom right here, and then the bait is gliding on a semi-slack line. It glides, that worm glides. And so if that fish is following it, it's a great opportunity for that fish to go swim over there, grab it up. So that's really why I love a drop shot so much, but it's also a great bait fishing shallow. Fishing shallow brush, fishing in rivers, on laydowns and rocky banks. It's just a bait and a technique that you can generate bites from 1 foot of water all the way out to 40 foot of water this time of year. And it's something that if you have not, if this is one thing, if you've not messed around with it, throwing a drop shot worm, this is the opportunity, this is the time of year to go ahead and throw this out there and get confidence in this technique. It is a fish catching technique, and it just catches them flat out. I like a little bit bigger profile worm. This one right here is one I like a lot. I can't talk a whole lot about it right now, but it's one I like a lot. But as far as setup goes, I like a 2/0 VMC Finesse Nico hook. I'm going to show you guys real quick here. I am going to rig this drop shot real quick here to show you guys exactly what's up. The first thing I'm going to recommend, okay, line, I'm going to go back the opposite way. So your point of your hook out, go back through, Palomar knot. Now, the cool thing about this is already, because I tied that knot that way, he's already standing up. Okay, he's already standing up a little bit, but it's something that always is something that I'll do. Take your tag in, go ahead and go back through your line tie, and now he's really standing up, no matter, even if you tied it the wrong way and you ran it where the hook points out, now you have him set up perfectly. All right, so that'll fix it. Even if you don't go the opposite way, it'll fix it that way. Now, I prefer these drop shot weights that you tie on, and that is just my personal preference, but you just lose a heck of a lot less, especially ones that, like, if you're spending like with tungsten. I know VMC's coming out with these ones. You just tie it on there. I'll just typically tie it, like, I'll do an overhand knot. It doesn't really, I'm not trying to spend like hella time on this. I'm just literally a couple overhand knots, call it good. That's a little bit short. Okay, that's a little short for the leader that I would select, but like 14 inches is sort of like 14 to 16 inches is my preferred length if I'm fishing dirtier water, shallower leader. Okay, so 8 to 10 inches if I'm fishing deeper, or like fishing like shallower water and dirtier water. And then I'm just gonna Texas rig it right there, and we are ready to go. Getting ready to roll. All right, and we're ready to get after them. So, rod reel line, 8-pound nano braid. The one thing that this new select rod, this is the new ducket fishing select rod that I designed. It's a little higher modulus rod. It's the best like rod that I've designed for this technique for a drop shot. It's a little bit more, has a little more backbone to him, and it's a great Texas rig drop shotting bait. And like you'll notice, I have this Texas rig. Not saying you can't nose hook large, like with a nose hook for largemouth, but I like Texas rigging my drop shot worms this time of year, especially when you're talking about like largemouth in general. Like your hookup ratio is so much better. You're around cover. It just gives you way more freedom to cast it anywhere and generate bites, and that's why I prefer going into, like, you know, fishing it this way. So that being said, 10-pound Suffix Advanced fluorocarbon, and that's the last one, but that's the one that I would highly recommend. You gotta pick him up. He's ready to roll. That one, it doesn't even need explanation. You can literally throw that everywhere I just literally told you out here. Of course, offshore schools, of course, shallow, anywhere in between. Just pick up a drop shot, pitch it around docks. It's a great way to generate bites. And to one, if you're in the back of the boat, if you're a co-angler, pick that drop shot up. Zzz, reel them in. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you are to the end of the video, I really appreciate everybody who watches the whole thing. It does mean a lot to me. I know I get rambling, I get to talking, but this one, I try to give you guys some goods every month. This one is June's a fun time to go out bass fishing. It's like, I feel like it's really like the month to make it happen. Go catch that big fish this month. Go let me know if there's any fish stories. Drop a comment as this month goes on. Let me know if any of these baits work for you. That's always the coolest stories that I get to hear, is like, hey man, I tried that popping frog, or you know, I tried that, you know, flipping that, like with the recommendation in the backs of the creeks, and I caught them. Exactly what you were saying. Like, that's cool to me, because I'm just literally giving you guys some nuggets, and it's helping you out and helping you guys catch fish, which is what it's all about. So thank you guys so much for following along for the channel, and we will see you on the next one. See y'all. Peace.